Hey, Mum, thank you for coming and doing this interview with me. I really appreciate it. You taking time out of your day to come and talk to us about your role and your workplace, so thank you for that.
That's a pleasure.
So you're a special school teacher.
Yes.
What types of communications do you use in the classroom or just in your job specifically?
Well, my most enjoyable and I think the most important communication I have is with the children that I teach.
Yeah. And so, are there any forms of communication specifically?
Well, I teach children from birth to 5 years old, so some of these children are at very, very early stages of communication, at the stage where they don't actually understand that to get something, to have their needs met or to make a choice, they have to communicate. So my first job with those young children is actually teaching them the purpose of communication. So if they make a noise, I do something pleasurable for them and then they get something back, and that's how children learn the basis of communication. So that's one method.
Oh, that sounds like it's quite difficult to sort of differentiate between what a child may need and what they're feeling. Do you use any forms of like sort of sign language or anything
Yes,
like that?
once you've developed the understanding that communication gets you something, when a very, very young baby is born, they have their needs met by crying. So they cry and then their mum or dad or auntie or grandma gives them something, food or a cuddle, or helps them, changes their nappy. So that's how a baby learns to communicate. Once I've taught that to the children that I have, I then have to individually work out what method of communication would work. And we use lots and lots of different systems. There's a system called PECS, there's a system called POD, and there's signing, and then there's verbal language. So there's lots of different systems.
Wow, that's really amazing. It sounds like there's a lot for you to sort of get on top of and learn. I've had some experience working with a non-verbal child, and I use a bit of PECS. Can you sort of elaborate on what PECS is?
Yeah. PECS is a system whereby when you are talking, when I'm talking to you and you're talking to me, we can remember our conversation, we can remember what we're talking about because we have a very high level of understanding in language. When a young child is learning to communicate, if I say a word, they won't remember that word. So if I say to them, would you like a drink? A minute later they won't remember the question that I've asked or if they want to drink. So the system of PECS, the idea of PECS is that instead of using a word to get something, the child is just able to give you a picture. So if the child's thirsty, they find a picture of a drink and give you that picture. If the child is hungry, they find a picture of food and give you that picture. If the child wants to go out and play, they'll give you a picture of the park. If the child wants to go to bed, it doesn't happen very often with children, but if, say, they did want to go to bed, they would give you a picture of their bed. It's a system whereby they don't have to rely on higher forms of language because the pictures are all in a little book, which is just their book. So it's made to that child. So it's got pictures of their family, their home, their school, and things that they like doing. And it's very quick and it gets them what they want very quickly.
And so, in a lot of teaching roles, there's obviously a lot of preparation required. So, I'm assuming that there's a lot of communication that needs to go on between you and your other colleagues. So, like to setting classrooms up, or packing them down, or like sharing room space and such as that. How does this communication come along?
Well, I have lots of different tiers of communication in my job. The first and my most enjoyable tier is with the children. My second and equally most enjoyable tier is with their parents, because very early on in a young child's life, the most information you're going to get through communication and through building up a relationship is from the parents. I only know what I see of those little ones when they come to school. Their parents have had a wealth of experience. So my first and primary source of communication to learn about the children and to teach them is with their parents.
And is this communication done like on a week-to-week basis or through like technology such as email or phones?
It can be done by email and phone if there's something. I see my children once or twice a week, and usually if something has happened, if a child's admitted to hospital or something not very nice has happened, the parents will phone me. But usually I like to do it face to face because, again, with communication, there's verbal communication and then there's body language, and I can usually tell when the mum walks, or dad or grandma or carer walks into the room with the child, whether they've had a good or a bad morning. And if they've had a bad morning, sometimes they just want to sit and cry. Sometimes they'll come in and they're really excited because they want to tell me something the child's done well, and then I can address that straight away. But often they've come in, they've had a terrible morning, the car didn't start, the dog ran away, the child wouldn't get dressed, the other child wasn't ready for school. And that's how I build that rapport, by we sit down and I say, what can I do to help? And that's a really important service for those young children, is also supporting their families.
And just going back on maybe the child isn't feeling well,
Yep.
or such and such, do you also communicate with say doctors or other
Yep.
specialists
Yep.
about these children and what sort of other problems they might have outside of school?
Yep, that's a really good question. When they first come to school, the parents have to fill in lots and lots of forms, and one of those is access to information. So they give me permission to talk to the child's speech therapist, physiotherapist, occupational therapist, paediatrician, geneticist if it's a rare genetic disorder, and any other professionals that are involved with that child. I can only do my job, the best way I can do my job is by communicating with a big, enormous team of professionals. So I have the professionals that the family has sourced, and then once the child starts at school, we have our own big team of people. So I also communicate with speech therapists, occupational therapists, physios, and other teachers, other colleagues, because then that child is getting the best service that they can get at home and at school.
Well, that sounds like a quite incredible network that you have
It
to
is
set
a
up.
massive network,
Yeah.
a massive network.
That's amazing. That sort of sounds like you're not just a teacher, but you also communicate. You communicate through the whole of what the child's going through on a day-to-day basis and on a month-to-month, week-to-week basis in terms of their progress for learning.
Yeah, because I also have to look ahead, and I have to also be very aware of their physical needs to talk to the physiotherapist, their speech needs to get advice from the speech therapist, and then all of those other needs come under the occupational therapist. So I'm a bit of a social worker, and I'm a bit of a counsellor, and I'm a bit of a teacher, and I'm a bit of a friend, and so I have that big tier of networking. But then above that, I also am accountable to the principal and the deputy principals, and then I am also accountable to Education Queensland. So I have the child, the family, my colleagues who are a great source of information, my principals who I have to be accountable with all my paperwork, and then they have to be accountable to the education department. So we have this big tier of communication that happens throughout the school.
Yeah, okay. And coming from that high tier, does that get communicated through you directly, or do you find out via your principal or your superior?
It all comes through the principal. So all the new initiatives from the education department will come through the principal, and that all comes by email. We have weekly staff meetings where we have a big catch up on what everyone's doing, but then also all of that official stuff, as you would call it, official stuff is done at a staff meeting or at a pupil-free day, when we might do new first aid practices, we might do new curriculum practices, we might do new healthcare practices. It all comes into that professional development, and I have to do 100 hours every 3 years, I think, of professional development myself to keep up my skills as well.
Yeah, and that comes under like the first aid training and stuff that you spoke about.
Yeah.
Okay, just another quick question. On extracurricular activities, can you organise extracurricular activities, say taking the kids on excursions?
Yes,
Do you organise that yourself, or does that come through the principal?
No, that's done on a classroom basis, but it has to be ratified by the P&C, which is the group that looks after all the fundraising that happens at the school. So if I want to take the children on an excursion, I have to ask the P&C to ratify that excursion. So that's another level of communication. So I have to fill all the paperwork in, send it to the P&C, they sign off and then send it back to me. And then the principal also has to sign off. And I have to do a workplace health and safety form, which goes to the department to make sure that if I'm going to a park, I've been there, I've made sure it's safe, I've made sure there's shade, I've made sure there's parking, and everything's organised. I can't just take the children out of school.
And that there must also be some sort of form or consent that has to come from the parents as
the
well?
parents have to sign a consent form to say that I put the date of the excursion, where we're going, what they'll need to bring, and then the parents sign off on that as well.
Okay, sounds...
Yeah. And we also have daily communication books that go home. So in the daily communication book, I'll write what they ate, what they've done, whether they were happy, if they were sad, if we've tried any new ideas, if there's anything I need to tell the parents, like swimming's cancelled or swimming's on or we're going horse riding. That all goes in a little communication folder, which is kept at the end of the year, and we archive those just to keep a record of our communication with parents. And one school is now an electronic version of that, so if I ring a parent, I have to log it onto One School and say what I've talked to the parent about.
And on One School, just a quick overview of One School.
One School is a new system that the government in their wisdom have brought out, so everything now goes onto this. It's at mainstream schools and special schools, so if a child is excluded from school, if we've had to apply first aid, if we've had to contact a parent, if the child's had to be sent to hospital, that all goes onto One School as a weekly update, or a daily update I suppose it is, and then their school reports go on One School, their IEPs on One School, and that record stays with the child. So from the first day they go to school until when they leave at 18, that One School record stays with them.
Okay. And just another quick question about do your students also go into regular schooling?
Yep, some of them
regular
do.
schools. And how does that come about? Do the parents initiate what school they want to go to, or is there's other schools chosen from information or other sources coming from Red Hill?
That's a good question. Usually, because my children are under school age in my class, I spend a lot of that last year, we call it pre-prep now because the children go to prep, advising parents on schooling. I can't say to the parents, your local state school's the best school or your local Catholic school's the best school, but what I can do is I can say to the parents, as I see it, these are your child's needs. As I see it, these are the needs that school's really good at meeting, but you might also want to visit this school and this school. But as an Education in Queensland employee, I can't say to a parent, don't go to that school or go to that school, but I can guide. And my one bit of advice to parents is, if you think your child can't learn in a certain environment, it's not the right environment for them. And mostly parents take a long time. There's a lot of grief happens in those early years because everyone wants their child to go to school with their friends, but some of our children just can't, in which case they can stay in the special school. And it takes some parents 2 or 3 years to be comfortable with that and understand that as a process. It's very hard for those parents.
So it sounds like there's a lot of burden that can be put on you, especially if the parents are pressuring you.
They don't pressure, but they just need help. Just need help, and it's my job to always be there to offer that help without it being my decision, because I know, after working in this environment for 30 years, that when I see a child, I can usually within a couple of days predict what their future schooling will be, but it's not my decision, it's the parent. Ultimately, any child can go to their local school, but whether it's the right place for them or not is a big question.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, your busy
any
schedule.
Other questions?
No, that's it. I've pretty much covered everything. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
It's all right. You have a lot of understanding too. So it's nice to talk to you. Nice to talk to somebody who has a little bit of understanding. Well,
obviously, being your son, you know, I've had some experience going in and around the school and checking out the different sort of stuff and learning new techniques. And I think that communication is so vital in your role specifically, because you're dealing with a lot of young kids who do have learning difficulties, who do need a lot more special attention than say kids who are capable of learning these skills. And you as you're not just a teacher, you're not just there to teach them, you're also there to counsel them and guide them in all these other aspects.
And communication is, if you can't communicate, you can't survive. You have to be able to communicate to survive, and that's what we do as humans. We communicate. So it's vitally important that we provide a system that not only is successful for the child, but also when the child goes out, everyone else can understand them. Because I can often understand the children that I work with, but if they were to go to McDonald's and ask for a hamburger, if they've got a little picture of a hamburger, that's pretty obvious what they want. But if they're signing or doing something else, it has to be a system that everyone can understand. So,
okay, thank you.
That's all right. Was that all right?